Welcome, everyone, to our Monday, January 13th Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome Dave DeTana. Let's see if I can do it correctly. From Buffamonte, Whipple, and Budafaro. To present our audit report financial statement summary for this evening. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me tonight. So what I'd like to do tonight is cover the graph analysis, which is projected on the various screens. But really the reason I'm here is, this is your independent audit report, which I believe was in your board packet. Mr. Williams, before the meeting, kind of asked, where does this go? And that's a really good question. In my mind, this is like your Super Bowl of financial reporting. As an accountant. And why do I say that? Well, this document goes to a lot of different folks, and it's only prepared once a year. You do prepare some financial information internally, state reports that get uploaded to New York State, but this document actually gets provided to the federal government, okay, through a clearinghouse, and actually any individual throughout the country would have the ability to access your financial statements because it's on the federal website. PDE receives this on an annual basis, and they actually have a couple divisions that look at it very closely, review it, ensure that the district's doing okay financially and complying with laws and regulations and so forth. You issue bonds over the years to help pay for the buildings and the infrastructure. Well, Vicki has to take this information and actually upload it to what's called an EMMA site, where all the bondholders that took a piece of your debt, they have interest in your financial well-being, and they have access to this well. Obviously, the board, the public, all have the ability to review your financial statements. So, pretty important document for the district. Okay. Included in here is a couple different things, okay? There's actually 3 reports that are on our letterhead that come from us that I'm going to walk you through. And then there's a tremendous amount of numbers that are really reported 2 ways. One, similar to the way a business would report their financial information on a long-term basis, and then also more on a governmental basis, similar to how governments would report their information. So that's included in here. And then lastly, if you look through this document, there's a lot of words, and we refer to those as disclosures. And a lot of the disclosures talk about how the district accounts for your financial reporting. And it also provides more background to some of the numbers that are included in here. Okay? Just for the board's understanding, which I'm not going to cover tonight, but I'll touch upon a couple of things tonight when I go over the overview. There's a really nice section, I think it's on pages 5 through 10. It's referred to as a management discussion and analysis section. And the intent of that section is to provide the reader a big picture of how are we doing this year compared to last year, and what are some of the things that changed. So if you ever get the opportunity, those first 5 pages are really good. They provide a really good perspective of the district's finances. Okay? Again, I'll touch upon some of the things during this presentation as well. All right.
Yeah, real quick, board members, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that all those documents are in board docs if you want to reference back to them or go over anything that Dave would review tonight, and we're happy to field questions for next week if we can't tonight. Okay?
Absolutely. Okay, so mentioned 3 reports on our letterhead. First report is actually really the first document in this big handout here. It's referred to as our independent audit report, okay? Basically, the crux of that report is for us after we perform all of our work, okay? And really, what is our work? Our work is to obtain evidence to be able to give the district an opinion. And the opinion is whether or not the numbers, as I mentioned, many in here, and also the disclosures are fairly stated in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So ultimately, are you reporting your information the way it's supposed to be reported? And do we feel comfortable that the numbers that are presented in the disclosures are accurate, okay, reasonably accurate? And I'm pleased to report that we're providing a clean, unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as a CPA firm. So when you have an audit, you're striving to get that report. So congratulations. That's what you want to hear as a board and as administration. And the staff, everybody really at the district. Okay? Okay, the next two reports are kind of labeled similarly. You'll see the word internal control and compliance in both. And when you think of internal controls, think about like your checks and balances. This first schedule, when I think of internal controls, I'm thinking of checks and balances over your disbursements to your vendors, your payments to your employees, the amount that the district receives on a regular basis, and then your financial reporting. Those are like your main cycles of the school district. And what are your checks and balances with respect to those? And then compliance, just overall, are you complying with the laws and regulations, okay? Within this document, we're not actually doing an internal control audit, and we're not actually auditing compliance, okay? However, we look, as I mentioned, we obtain a lot of information throughout the course of the audit, and during the work that we do, if there are any items that we consider to be a weakness in controls or an area of non-compliance, we're required to report it within this section of the audit, okay? We have one item for those of you that were here last year and the year before. It's basically we provide assistance in putting together this 62-page document, okay? How do we do that? Well, we help the district prepare the disclosures that are included in this document, and we also help you formulate some of the information on a long-term basis, and we also provide some journal entries during the course of the audit. And so that's what's included within that comment, okay? Pretty common for school districts to see that comment. Most school districts look to their auditors to provide that level of assistance during the course of the audit. Okay, and that's really all we have. So it's probably something you're going to see again next year, something that you've seen in the past, but that's really the only comment that we have on a global basis with respect to compliance and internal controls. There's one additional report. Again, it's on compliance and internal controls. Little bit different here, because when we talk about compliance, we are actually testing your compliance with federal guidelines, and we are also testing your internal controls with respect to your controls over the federal guidelines, okay? This report's required because the district receives more than $750,000 of federal awards, okay? In the current year, it was about $2.1 million. Okay, last year it was about 2.6 million. So it declined a little bit. That was due to the pandemic-related funding, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. This year we actually tested, the programs that we tested that were federal were your cafeteria program, which actually was good timing because you converted to what's called the community eligibility provision program, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about here. And then also your ESSER pandemic-related funds, okay? So everything related to this report is us getting documentation to support whether you're complying with those federal guidelines, okay? Pleased to report, again, we're providing an opinion on this page. Did you comply with the federal guidelines? And we are saying, yes, you did with no exceptions, in that your internal control over compliance, there were no instances of a material weakness or a significant deficiency. So this is really the highest level of assurance that we can provide you, which is great news because, again, this document goes to the federal government. So great job on that. Any questions? Okay. All right. So the next section of the presentation I'd like to cover are some of the numbers. And as I mentioned, two ways of reporting them within school districts. The first way is a long-term outlook as far as the district's concerned. And so you can see we have assets, liabilities, and net position. Included in the assets are things like cash, things like receivables that we have due to us, but it's also capital improvements, improvements that we've made to our school buildings, okay? Our liabilities include like things like vendor amounts that are just timing that we owe, some accrued salaries, but the biggest liabilities we have are the debt that we've taken on to help pay for the improvements, and also the share of the pension obligation in Pennsylvania, okay? Those are our two biggest liabilities by far. And so when you take the liabilities and show them, you take the assets, you can see you have an overall net position deficit. However, you can see over the last 5 years, you're trending in the right direction. You continually have positive long-term basis financial statements, so you're slowly but surely moving out of the red, okay, which is a great thing. And you know, you'll notice, like, why did our liabilities go down? Because we're paying down our debt, and we haven't issued any new debt, so we continue to make payments on our debt. And there has been a little bit of a decline in the pension liability as well. Okay. All right, district-wide financial statements, revenue, expenditures, and change in that position. I'm going to cover some of these when I go over the fund financial statements. Hi, Andy. Expenditures. You'll notice our expenses in the current year were up about $1.5 million, or about 5%. Okay, you might say, geez, that's a little higher than I would have anticipated during the course of the year. Well, this is, again, long-term reporting. Included in your expenses is what we call pension reporting, okay? During the 23-24 year, your contributions to the pension system were actually very comparable to what they were in the prior year. Weren't a lot of change because the rates were pretty comparable. However, the way expenditures get recorded on a long-term basis is based on an actuarial study that calculates what that other post-employment, or what that pension expense should be. And actually, your pension expense on paper was up about $800,000, or about half that increase in expenditure. So if you peel that away, total expenditures were up more modestly to the tune of about 2.5% this year versus last year on a long-term basis. Okay? And as I mentioned, we saw the net deficit continuing to improve. Why is that? Well, you can see the far right column of the graphs. Each and every year we have a positive number there, and really pretty consistent. You know, each of those 5 years, for the most part, are really kind of comparable on a year-to-year basis. I like consistency if it's going in the right way. And we'll see that kind of also in the general fund as well as the cafeteria. Okay, any questions long-term basis? This long-term basis presentation of the financial statements is really the only place that you see it on a year-to-year basis, okay? The financial reports that Vicki has to upload to the state, probably your month-to-month information that the board looks at is more short-term. Once a year, you have to compile it similar to a business on a long-term basis. Okay? So general fund, main operations of the district. And when the board looks at financial information on a monthly basis, this is what you're looking at, the general fund, okay? Short term, so included in assets really are cash and the amount that's due to us. Our liabilities are things that we owe vendors that we got the service, but we didn't make the payment yet at year end. It's our teachers that earn the time during the year, but we just pay them during the summer. So it's short term, okay? And you can see our assets almost identical over that 5-year period. It dipped up a little bit in 21, but then it stayed static over 4 years. Liabilities, pretty static, as is our overall fund equity, okay? In the current year, you can see the blue versus the purple. We had an increase of about $300,000 in 2024, okay? Which is a good thing. So here's components of your assets. Again, in total, pretty comparable. You'll notice a little bit of an increase in cash, a little bit of a decrease in due from other governments. Really, that was the result of every year you get what's called rental subsidy. When you make your payment on your debt, you get reimbursed for that. In the past, that money was received after year end. In the current year, it was received before year end. Just timing, okay? And so that's why your cash was up a little bit and your receivables were down a little bit. As I mentioned, overall liabilities very comparable year after year. And so it brings us to fund balance. So fund balance ultimately is basically, if you were to liquidate your assets and bring them into cash, pay off your short-term liabilities, what would be left over is your fund balance, okay? And you have two silos. You have committed fund balance and unassigned fund balance. Your committed fund balance is money that the Board of Education has approved to set aside for construction, okay? And then unassigned is basically everything left over. I will say you do a nice job at the district at monitoring and approving and talking about your capital needs and then having approvals of when you want to use the committed fund balance and when you want to add to the committed fund balance. It's really, it looks like we read the minutes as part of the audit, and looks like you talk about that regularly on a regular basis and have approvals. That's wonderful. That's very, very transparent and are really nicely done. Okay? Revenue. If you look at this year versus last year, an increase of just under $300,000, so about a 1% increase in our revenue. What happened in 2024? You'll see our local revenue was up, our state sources was up, and our federal sources were down, okay? Local sources, mostly that was related to taxes. You had about $300,000 of taxes in the current year that you didn't have in the prior year. State sources, most of that was basic educational subsidy. So PDE provided increases in 2024. And so most school districts saw that go up in 24. And then lastly, federal sources, again, that's the pandemic-related funding. And so you can see really the last 4 years have been kind of elevated, and in the current year that dipped down. So you spent most of your federal dollars during 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then you had a little bit left in 2024, where you spent, I think, around $500,000 As of June of '24, you had about $50,000 left to spend of all the pandemic funding, which totaled about $4 million to the district. Okay? I think I mentioned last year, that graph for the federal sources, if you were to look at it on a school-by-school basis, everybody was different. Some schools spent, they would see that red bar be significant and then nothing after the red bar. We had some schools that had nothing in the red, nothing in the green, and everything this past year. And then we had schools similar to you where you kind of evened it out over a period of 3 or 4 years. Okay? Wasn't a right answer to that. It was really based on a school-by-school need. Okay, so revenue up about 1%, expenditures down. It's a little bit deceiving because if you look at your overall expenditures, part of that decrease was your transfer to your capital projects, okay? So if you were to pull out the transfer of the capital projects, overall our expenditures would have been up about $300,000. Again, about 1% increase in our total expenditures in the general fund. So pretty comparable revenue versus expenditures as far as change is concerned. I really like this page. This shows a bar chart of your revenue being in the blue, expenditures being in the red, okay? And what jumps out at you is, for the most part, every single year, our revenue is pretty close to our expenditures, okay? What I always like to do, you know, because we do a lot of school work, as I mentioned to Mr. Williams, is kind of peel back, you know, how much are we infusing in the capital, and what does our operations look like before we make that transfer to the capital, okay? So maybe we want to issue debt instead of paying for capital on an ongoing basis. And so what do our operations look like? And so if I peel back the transfer that goes from the general fund to the capital project fund, I'll just read the numbers to you. In 2020, without the transfer, you would have had a surplus of about 1.7 million. 2021 was about 2 million. 22 was about 1.3. 23 was 1 million. And 24 was about 1 million. Okay? What jumps out at me is those numbers are very, you know, for a $30 million budget, there's a lot of consistency there as far as your operations. In the black, not significantly in the black, but holding your own. So really nice job there. Okay? Any questions related to the general fund? Okay, I'm not going to go crazy on the cafeteria, but again, a lot of consistency here and a lot of positive consistency. The two takeaways, you can see fund balance, the net position, and look at that each and every year. We're having steps in the right direction. We have positive results in our cafeteria over the last 5 years, okay? And so I'm going to go all the way to the, again, the line chart. And so you might ask, like, well, how does it happen? Well, you can see over the last 4 years, our revenue has exceeded our expenditures, okay? Back in 2020, you might say, well, what happened during that year? Well, that was the year of the pandemic. And so we had to really shut down school. We had still costs that we had to incur related to payroll and benefits. And so a lot of schools, depending on what you did during that time period, might have had a loss from operations. Since the pandemic in 21 and 22, you know, significant surpluses, and then in the current year, also a surplus. You did have a significant change in the current year where you switched from a traditional cafeteria program where students were eligible for free, reduced, or paid meals, and you transitioned to what's called the community eligibility provision, where students received free lunches and breakfasts, okay? Sometimes folks hear that and they say, well, that's going to be good financially for the district. And that's not necessarily true, because even though the students eat for free, the way that program gets reimbursed is a little different, okay? And that reimbursement is actually, could be different on a school-by-school basis. It's really based on a percentage that the district receives based on the number of students that are directly certified, okay? So it takes the total direct certification of the district, multiplies it by a multiplier of 1.6, and it gives you a percentage, okay? Whatever that percentage is, your percentage was about 65%. So every meal that was served, you reimburse the federal rate for 65% of those meals, and then 35% there's no reimbursement for, okay? So during the current year, what occurred was you served a lot more meals in 2024 than you did 2023. Your lunches were actually up 12%, and your breakfasts, you served 26% more meals in the current year, okay? That increase helped offset the fact that you didn't get reimbursed for paid meals, okay? Because you're free and reduced, if you looked at the concentration last year, it was about 65%, so pretty comparable. But the 35% you received paid meals for. In the current year, you didn't get anything for the paid meals, okay? But you had an increase in meals served, which helped offset that decline in the paid meals. So nonetheless, did very well in the cafeteria in 2024, okay? Any questions financially? Some nice charts, nice trends. Very well done. The very last section is what we refer to as a management letter. These are comments that are general in nature. For the sake of time, I won't go through every one. Just a couple comments here. You'll notice there's words called GASB 101. That's a new accounting pronouncement that's going to be in play next year, that we'll talk a little bit about and how that is going to impact some of the district's financial information. I mentioned pandemic grant funding throughout tonight's presentation. That's, again, going away. And so I think the essence of that comment is, you know, what impact could that have to the district now that we don't have those funds? Do we have programs that were in play, like after-school programs, summer school programs, that we're now going to have to continue to fund, or maybe we're not going to have those programs going forward? And so that's really what that comment's all about, is just, it's going to be different. We're going to have less funds. You really didn't use a tremendous amount of funds, particularly in the last year, for operations. I think in the current year you had about 50 to 60,000 of operational costs. Some schools used all their pandemic for existing operations, which meant they build up their fund balance, but now all that revenue is going to go away and they got to pay for the operations. So, but again, that's a comment. Student activities is a typical comment we have. And then lastly, interest earns. You know, we showed you on the first page of the graph, you have cash available. And the comments really, you know, the interest rates have kind of come down a little bit from their all-time highs, but there's still some opportunity to, you know, get good interest in the banks and the financial institutions. And that comment's just to, you know, take advantage of those rates when you can. And that's it. Any questions?
No questions?
No, I just wanted to recognize Vicky's work and her staff. This takes a whole team of people,
Yeah.
the least of which is me. So I just wanted to recognize that it takes a lot of work. This is not an accident, and it's there's a lot of good people, Vicki and her folks that are working behind the scenes to make sure that we're in good shape.
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned, I like consistency, and consistency doesn't happen by accident. It's the constant monitoring by Vicki and her team and Ken and the folks that are in charge of grants and the board that oversees everything. That's what it's all about. And, it's a really nice report for 2023-24. It's not easy. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of demands on financial resources, and, keep at it. So, nice job in 2024.
Well, and we'd like to thank you, Mr. Datana, for a easily digestible and understandable audit report from the board. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Dave.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right.
Have a good evening.